which it's such a pleasure to have you on the show because you and Tim are people that Daniel and I really love. I mean, I feel like you're very inspiring. You're married, you have a daughter, and it's, I don't know how you guys started, which is one of the things I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
But I know a little bit about where you guys are now, and just it's inspirational to see how, you know, I'm sure there was a beginning, and I know a little bit about it from what you've told me, but I kind of want to develop that because once we start talking about what you're doing now, it becomes very, it's hard to see like the long vision when you're just starting out. And so wanted to talk about that. How did you get started?
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say the majority of people who watch are just getting started?
It depends. So most people that are watching they could be making six figures in their W-2 job, and they want to go into business, but they have family responsibilities, they got other things, and so there is that concern. Then there are people that are in business that don't necessarily know real estate, but they know business and
Sure.
want to get into real estate. And then it's just a combination of different people. So
Yeah.
but I want to hear the beginning because
Yeah.
I would like to know how this whole wild ride got started.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tim and I got married when we were little tiny babies and we were 21 and 22. And so, probably during our first year of marriage, I'm pretty sure it was, Tim read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And we were both working our W-2 jobs. Actually, we had one more year of college. We did, graduated. Neither one of us used our degrees, but thank goodness we went. Otherwise, we wouldn't have met.
Right.
And so he read that, and that kind of put us on a different trajectory. We just knew we did not want to work the rest of our lives for other people. We did work for a very long time for other people, and then just did real estate as a side hustle. So we started in 2006 buying, flip houses and that sort of thing. This is like pre being able to get all your information on Zillow.
Right.
Has all this information now. So like Tim had all these spreadsheets of all the information of the houses that were going to auction. And then every Sunday we would drive with his parents around to like buy like 10 or 15 houses. So it was like old school bootstrapping it. And then we'd go to the courthouse, bid on houses. So we did that. We got caught with one house in the crash in 2008 or 9. We also move every like 2 to 3 years. So we
Very
would,
normal for flippers.
yes, buy a house, renovate it, move on. We've been in our current house for almost 2.5 years, and we're both getting like the itch of like, oh, it's just time to move. Like, we can't put down roots. We can't do that. So every time we move into a house, our family is like, is this the house? And it's like, oh, Lord, that is way too much commitment. I am never going to be able to commit to a house.
That's
All I,
so funny.
all I can tell you is my husband and my kid are not for sale, but everything else for
Good.
sale at the right price.
Right.
So Tim was in mortgages for about 15 years and he branched out. And all this time we're flipping and doing all of that stuff. And then we sort of got turned on to, the whole BRRRR strategy. Tim was really like listening to Bigger Pockets a ton.
Right.
So probably around 2016. So from 2006, then took a little bit of a break in the downturn, then probably started again in 2011 to 2016, really flipping a whole lot of stuff. I mean, not like hundreds of houses. I don't know. I'd say it's less than 30. But it gave us a good, we knew houses. We knew we didn't like old houses. Ugh, I hate old houses. I do not like character. I am not we are just not those people. Give us a good like split foyer, 80s house, 90s. That's our jam. There's just way too much stuff that goes into like 50s, 60s and older that we just are not prepared for and don't want to be. So then got into the BRRRR strategy, long-term rentals. Then I had a client because by this point I was in real estate full time. And she was like, man, you guys are crazy not to be buying in the Smoky Mountains short-term rentals. So we bought our first 4 in 2018. And I was like, the only way I'm buying these is if you co-host for me on Airbnb. So that way, Tim and I just worked our jobs and she ran all of that stuff. And now we've got 22 units, but we're selling 2 right now because we've got a couple of businesses that we're buying into.
Nice.
So that's kind of where we are. Tim's working on a cabin development. We've got some other new construction condos under contract. So I always tell people it's like, you never, like when you hear people's stories, don't ever compare your chapter 1 to our chapter, 35. You have to start somewhere and you just freaking grind it out because, dang it, I'm not working for someone else when I'm 75, I want a different lifestyle. I'm not going to be going on all these crazy vacations like all my friends. I'm going to wait and make money and, invest it in real estate. And I'm going to do something different. I'm going to create generational wealth. And that's that really is what motivates us, generational wealth and advancing. We love the Lord and advancing the kingdom. So that's our why.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I was going to ask you that because inevitably while you're going through this from 2006 to now 2023, there's difficulties that come along the way. And often a lot of people, you listen to this and you want tactics and you want the how, but what really matters is the why.
Yes.
Because truth be told, it's going to get hard.
Yes.
There's going to be moments that are difficult and your why is what keeps you pushing. And so I was curious if your why had changed from the beginning to what it is now, or if it's maybe developed into something greater.
Yeah, that's a great question. For sure, when I was starting out, like after reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you know how he retired at 40? And that was like always my goal. I'm like, dang it, I'm retiring at 40. Well, I did. Like 3 days before my 40th birthday, I was able to step back from my director of sales position. And for sure, my why was always the Lord is our why, for sure. And I will say probably grinding it out and being able to retire was a huge, massive goal. And then once I hit that, I'm not even a year into it. And I've had to really reassess, like, why am I doing this?
Right.
Why do we keep going and everything? And but I have really now I'm in a stage where it's like I want to enjoy my family and my business. Our kid is 8 and they just grow up really, really fast. And so it's like I can't sit around and eat bonbons all day with my feet up. But because I get bored out of my mind. But I want to be able to, take my kid to the splash pad on the weekend or, go out for a spicy noodle bowl date with her and not be stressed out and everything like that. So probably family has really become a big why. And then having to really go through the not working like pedal to the metal it's a definite transition because I think I go through spurts of working really, really hard in this past year. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I need a break. And so I take a break and then it's back into the grind. So it's been an interesting transition year for sure.
Yeah. And how do you determine, because we're both Christian. We are both in business and real estate, right? Real estate is a business, it's the truth. But so it's kind of culture a lot of times tries to teach us like there's like a hustle culture, a grind culture, which I understand that's necessary. You're not just like, it's not money is not just going to like fall onto your lap, right? As we hoped. It's not happening that way. You have to work for it. But how do you balance out that belief between like hustle culture and also like I need to rest, and I need to be with my family. It can't just be all about work.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I'm still figuring it out, quite honestly. We've got a really good business coach that we talk to, and actually, we had a good, literally that conversation practically just a couple of weeks ago that helped us. And then Tim and I, just being married for 20 years. Have become even more and more open with each other, and just making sure we have incredibly open communication. We're not shoving anything under the rug. And I think that's really helped us to be able to communicate, like Tim wants to be pedal to the metal. Like that is where, and that's what he loves. And so me taking a supporting role in that, supporting in the businesses and the real estate that we've got. And then he also understands, hey, like our business coach said, Holly is like a cheetah. She can go really, really fast and for like, 6 to 8 weeks, and then she needs a break. Like I need to leave and go out of town for a week and then come back.
And then you're like refreshed.
And then I'm refreshed. And so I think it's just knowing that about yourself, and then knowing that there are just seasons of life, and then seasons of life that I don't want to repeat. We did a season of life where we were like two ships passing in the night, where we're both working W-2 jobs and then trying to do real estate in our free time, and which we did, but it's like we never saw each other.
Yeah.
And it's like, that was necessary for that time, and we were both okay with it, but neither one of us want to repeat it.
Right. And don't you feel like when everything is just business and like money, and when you start seeing, I mean, this happens, right? I think it happens to every marriage. It's like, okay, well, now my marriage is like just not in the place where I need it to be. And truth be told, it's like, well, I mean, what the heck do I need all this money for? It's like, if I'm going to not have the marriage be good, then why am I striving so hard for this other thing? So what is that with you? I mean, going back to that season that you were talking about, right? I don't know what your thought process was, but I think it's something that a lot of people go through.
For sure. It definitely did. And at that point, like now we very much use our business coach as a sounding board. Like we've probably been with him, I'd say for the past like 3-ish years. And seriously, the first probably 6 to 8 months was almost marriage counseling, just helping us to communicate, because it's like you've got the hat as we're business partners. And then Tim at that point was, I mean, he's fully running it, but I'm still director of sales. And then then I come over here and I'm like, well, what are you doing? Let me give you all of my opinions. And he's like, I don't need your opinions. Go back over here.
Right.
And you also have the hat of we're husband and wife and parenting our kiddo together. And so I think having like a third party that you love and respect and who has the same moral code and values as you, helping you work through things, was incredibly helpful to us. And it really helped it, and continues to help us just to be very open and stay in it, because, when you have a fight as business partners, all of what you are as a married couple somehow comes in.
Always.
And it's like, okay, and so he brought out just really good points. He's like, business partners would not be having conversations at 10 p.m. at night. So don't do that. That's when you're a husband and wife. And so just made some good points that it's like, don't set yourself up for failure. And you almost have to learn to compartmentalize, which is not the easiest thing in my brain to do. So
it's not. I've heard people say, and I agree with it. It's that women are like, our brains are like, like a ball of yarn where like everything is connected.
Yes.
And so that's why our conversations can go from like point A to point Z quickly. Whereas men, their brains are like boxes, and so there's a box for family. Maybe it's easier, a box for business. There's a box for everything. And I see that with Daniel all the time, and they don't understand. But so I think for me also, it is difficult where you're like, people always say that, compartmentalize or shut off the time at this. And it's like, well, it's like all a blend, right?
Uh-huh. And I don't know if, and I think what has also happened, because obviously I know Daniel, and I think Daniel and Tim, my husband, help balance you and me out.
Hmm.
They're much more the stable and fixed ones. We are a little bit more high strung and passionate.
Yeah.
And, um, and pros and cons to both of them. And I think Tim definitely helps calm me down. And it's like, okay, I know we shouldn't be having this conversation at 10 p.m. because it's just going to irritate the daylights out of me, but I need to know this information. And so I think having and being understanding towards each other of your strengths and weaknesses and giving each other grace is very, very important. Being
I love that.
cognizant of it. It's a daily thing, right?
Yeah, for sure. And another thing I wanted to talk to you about that has to do with marriage is, I mean, I know you guys have a daughter, you guys have different types of businesses and real estate. You have that property management company that I know. Now you told me you're looking into buying businesses. It's like what? But there's also another aspect which you had brought up earlier, which
Yeah.
was, my why is the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know? I was just talking about this today with Daniel, and I was like, a lot of people that are in business, and love God, and it's we love God. That's how we are. But how do you know your heart is in the right place?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's very easy for you to consciously say to people, I am doing what I'm doing because a lot of people will say, like, I want to fund the kingdom, right? The kingdom of God, right? But how do you really know that that is why you're doing it and your heart is in the right posture? I don't know if there's a great answer for that, but I wanted to see your point of view.
Yeah, God, that's such a good question. I think we truly know our own hearts, the Lord and me. Know my own heart, and He knows it even better than I do. And I think we know when have veered off track. And I definitely have had seasons where it's like, it's the blessing and curse of being really good at what you do, because you become very successful in it and you're like, dang, I am good at this,
Right.
and you forget to like include the Lord in different like decisions. And then all of a sudden, I know for myself, we'll hit up against something and it's like, whoa, this is way bigger and I need to take a step back, because if I make a decision one way or the other without His perspective and help, we could, jump off an edge here. And
Right.
so I think knowing that about myself and like taking that constant evaluation, and then honestly for us, it's giving. It keeps our heart in the right place, like extravagantly giving, not only tithing, but it is giving as soon as the Lord says, write this check to this person, to this ministry, to your church. And for me, it also helps because Tim takes care of all of our finances. So I never know where all of our money is, which good and bad. And so then if I hear the Lord say, hey, give this amount, it's like, I don't know.
Okay.
And that sounds good. And I'll say, hey, I really feel like we should be giving this. Our tithe, our 10% is a given, but it's like, hey, when we should give this amount. And He's like, okay, let's do it. So I think that really, it's that communication, staying in communication with the Lord. And I mean, I personally know when I get off track.
Hmm.
So
It's like going back on track when you notice, hey, oh, there's something wrong here that
yeah.
I'm doing. And no one has to point it out. It's
Mm,
something we notice about ourselves,
yeah.
right? So I agree with that. Another thing I wanted to ask is, since you are in business with your spouse, right? With Tim, there is a factor of generosity that you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
which I have noticed a lot of the people that are very successful that I know, they're all generous. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, all of them, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes there is a partner that is more generous than the other,
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
there's seasons where one like wins over the other.
Sure.
How do you guys determine how generous you're going to be with other people, because inevitably, when you are wealthy or God has blessed you, whatever you want to say, um, you do have something in the back of your head when you're thinking like, okay, are people coming to me because I'm blessing them or because of me? Just like they love me for me. So
Mhm.
how do you deal with that?
Yeah, thankfully that we really have not had a whole lot of people approach us asking for money. I don't think we've ever had anybody approach us asking for money. So we've never had to deal with that. We've known when we need to give to people. And then definitely we have had times when it's like, one of us will be like, we should give to this person. And the other one is like, which is sometimes me. No, I don't want to because I have a personal like conflict.
Yeah.
And it's the Holy Spirit who takes care of it for me because I can't hardly go an hour and then I come back to Tim and I'm like, you're right. It is not about the person because I have from being so driven and that hustle and that work hard, I have struggled with seeing people not work hard. And it's like, oh my gosh. And, they will complain about they don't have any money and you're watching them spend all their money, hardly work. And I'm like, that's because you're not working. Like,
Right.
go
Right.
and get a job and
Right.
stay at it. And so I've definitely, it's like, the Lord is like, hey, I'll take care of it. Like, you do not have to be their Holy Spirit patrol. Like, if you
Right.
just trust me, I'm going to take care of it. You just take care of your own heart and make sure you stay generous. And I'm like, okay, that sounds good. And it releases me to move on.
I
And
love that. I love that because a lot of people, I mean, this can be applied in different areas. So a lot of people will say, oh, I'm driving, you see a homeless person. I'm not, a lot of people say this, like, doesn't matter what faith or if you have any faith,
Mhm.
I'm not going to give them money. I'll give them food, or maybe I won't give them anything because I don't know what they're going to do with it.
Right.
But in my mind, it's related to what you just said. It's, well, when you're going to give a gift to someone, do you
Hmm.
ever tell them how to use it? No. You
Right.
could give them a pair of shoes. I mean, it could be your friend, it could be your mom, whatever it is.
Hmm.
And they might not like it and they could give it to somebody else. But
Right.
you're not like their judge or, trying to tell them how they should use what you've given to them. So,
Right.
why would we be any different to someone that is homeless or to someone that has different beliefs than we do? Because we believe, okay, well, we do need to work hard.
Right.
But I think it also applies back to, why do you think people are in that state of poverty, or they just live paycheck to paycheck? Um, what do you think keeps them there, opposed
Mhm.
to, I don't know your upbringing. I don't know if your parents were wealthy or not. And so do you think that that really affects the way people believe about having money and being wealthy?
Yeah, I would say so. Their upbringing definitely does. I was raised by a single mom who was very good about saving, and she taught us. I mean, she was a nurse, so she had a good job, but it wasn't like we just had millions of dollars like in the bank or something. My dad definitely had, he's an entrepreneur, and my parents divorced when I was very young. And I was always taken care of. So it wasn't, but we weren't in, like, we'll tell our kiddo, we're like, where the house we live in and the things we have is not normal. Like, that is not what most children have. And so we have really taken to teaching her that you're not given everything. You have to pay for stuff. You have to work for stuff. And to instill that, because that's what was instilled in Tim and I. It was working hard, giving, saving. And I think, like, to me, I think working and giving breaks poverty. The more that you give, the more you're going to be entrusted with by the Lord. And that's why you see people who aren't even believers and they are extravagant givers and they are
Mm-hmm.
millionaires and billionaires because
Mm-hmm.
they give. And it's a kingdom principle that the more you give, the more you're going to be entrusted with.
Right. I love that. A lot of times, they say it's better to give than to receive. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that's because the measure that you give
Mm-hmm.
determines the measure that you receive or get.
Yes.
So we all have the ability to get more. I mean, that
Yes.
shouldn't be the intention, but I mean, it is true though.
Yes. Oh, it's very much, and I mean, my belief is the Lord did not, he doesn't want any of us to live in poverty. I know that there are many people that were born with much more than I had or much less than I had, but every single one of us has the capacity to obtain wealth, and that is through living kingdom principles and through giving. And I just believe that with all of my heart because it's just the incredible doors that have opened when Tim and I have sacrificially and obediently given. It's just like the business opportunities that we didn't even go after, the people that we meet. It's, you guys walking into our church when you just, were your short stint in Tennessee and meeting you all, the connections that you make, the doors that get opened by the Lord because you just obey and give. You can spin your wheels for hours and hours and never open those doors yourself. And
True.
that's why especially Christians that I know of, and if they're in business and they're struggling, I mean, I've had direct conversations. It's like, well, do you give? They'll ask for prayer, pray for my finances. And it's like, okay, but do you give? Because if you don't, you're literally just violating a kingdom law. It's like going up on top of my house and saying, pray for me that I'll fly. You're going to violate gravity. I can't pray to violate gravity. You are going to fall to the ground and hurt
Right.
yourself. So I'm just passionate about giving. We're passionate about it because we believe it truly unlocks so many closed off places.
So what would you say to someone that says, well, I don't have any money and I can't give with, I don't have anything. I'm living paycheck to paycheck. So how can I give?
Mhm.
Because we're talking about money, but
Yeah.
what would you say to someone like that?
Yeah, and I think that's why it's very important as parents to teach our children when they are young how to tithe. And I, unfortunately, that person didn't have a parent that taught them when they were young. So when I had $20, I just knew $2 was going to my church. And when I made $150 from working a week at the library, it's like $15 went as an offering. So then when we made hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's not a big deal to write that check. So it's like you have to start tithing. One of the biggest things, Jesse Duplantis, he teaches on how money works. If you look up on YouTube, it's how money works. It's the 4 types of giving, and he goes into massive detail on just the 4 different types of giving. So if you really have a heart for wanting to know about it and you start, just like anything, you start studying and you start implementing it, you're going to see your life turn around. And all of a sudden you start doing it, and a year later you'll look back and you're like, man, it was the grace of God that got me through the time in my life when I didn't tithe. Like the massive grace of God that I wasn't as impoverished as I should have been. And then now and people perish from lack of knowledge. They don't
Hmm.
know that they should give and they should tithe. So start studying it and just let the Lord speak to you because he'll be able to take care of all your questions.
I love that. And I think what you're basically saying is no matter how little you have, even if you have $1, you
Yes.
could give a dime,
Mm,
and give it to the Lord because, he's able to multiply really from nothing.
yes.
But if you give him even just a little bit of
Hmm.
whatever it is that you have, he can use that.
Yes.
What would you say to people that are tithers and are in business
Hmm.
or, whatever, but
Yeah.
they are, or they at least tithe.
Yeah.
But it's like, Holly, I am nowhere near close to, the how blessed you and your husband are. So like, am I doing it wrong? Am I, I've
Yeah.
always tithe, I've always given 10%, but what am I doing wrong? Like, what would you say to someone like that?
Well, the answer could be you could be doing it wrong. And that's where Jesse Duplantis's teaching comes in and completely corrects so many things. So a lot of people will believe, okay, if I make, say it's $500 a week or whatever, and as long as I give $50, I should be good. But it's where do you give your $50? And that's where he goes into the four types of giving. So your tithe is always given to your church. But if you take your $50 and you decide, hey, I'm going to go buy this single mom groceries, that is amazing. But you have just changed your tithe that should have gone to the church, the storehouse, and you've changed it over into almsgiving. And almsgiving is paid back dollar for dollar. So you will receive $50 back. But if you had given it to your church, then you're tapped into what the benefits, the return on investment that comes with tithing, where the Lord opens the storehouse of heaven. He stays the hand of the enemy. I mean, you become so blessed that people, the nations turn and they're like, wow, you are blessed. And so when Tim and I had always tied to our church, like we knew that, but when we watched his teaching on that, it was incredibly eye-opening because it's not only what you're giving, but where you're giving it to that is very, very important. So most of the time, if people think that they're tithing and they think it's not working, it's because you have exchanged it and you've probably given it as almsgiving rather than a tithe.
Or I think sometimes, this is just my opinion, sometimes people want to give $10 on Monday and
Mm.
they want, 100 on Tuesday, or even, within a year. I mean, Daniel and I are also tithers, right? And to me, I've been in church for over a decade. I mean, I don't even know how long, but since 2010, I think. And so, um, I've always given my tithe ever since then. But it's been, what, we're in 2023, 13 years. So
Mm-hmm.
my life looks very different
Yeah.
financially in 13 years than it did when I first started, right?
Yes.
I was also younger and all these other things. But sometimes I think you give something like so long ago
Mm-hmm.
that you forget about,
Yes.
and then you receive it, you know,
Very much.
down the road.
Absolutely.
Have you seen this in your own life? And
Oh,
do you have a story or something that you could share?
for sure. And I think, I don't know if a story per se, but I think it's like every time Tim and I, even more so like, because we, neither one of us work W-2 jobs. So now we don't have like, oh, I made this amount, so I write this tithe check. So if we don't
Right.
have a quote unquote tithe check, we write a minimum set amount every single week because that's just what the Lord has directed us to do. But whenever we feel like the Lord impress on us to give a higher amount, like to give an offering of some sort of amount, I swear it is not long. It is like within a weeks or a month that like suddenly something will open up and it's like that was the Lord opening things up on our behalf, for us.
Amazing.
But I definitely believe that seeds that you sow so far back, they're always coming to life. And it's just you keep on going with the Lord. I mean, what else are we gonna do? You know, I don't
Yeah.
have anywhere else to go. So we're going
Right.
on with the Lord. So I would just encourage people to keep trusting the Lord for sure.
I agree with that. And you were mentioning also that you are trying to teach these principles onto your daughter to
Mhm.
pass down, the same, I don't know, values and beliefs that you currently hold.
Yeah.
So how have you done that practically
Mhm.
in teaching her just things about money. It could be the tithe or it could be other things. How have you done that practically?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like, we'll have her tithe on her money. I mean, she will get birthday money or Christmas money. We're still in the phase of getting like toys and that sort of thing. But like my mom will send her money in the mail, in a card or something. And so she just always automatically sets a portion of it aside and is like, I'm going to give this at church and everything. And I think it's modeling that, it's talking about it, it's not making it a secret,
Right.
and you
Right.
just talk about that stuff with your kids and that becomes very normal. And I mean, the verse that Tim and I live by as a family is Proverbs 13:22, where a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And a huge part of that is not only leaving an inheritance, but teaching your children and your children's children how to sustain it and grow it. And because how many times have we seen a generation work their guts out? They hand it over to their kids. Their kids know they're either spoiled, they
Yeah.
don't have anything to do with it, or they totally blow it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, just being in real estate, it's like how many kids I've worked with that have, their parents handed them down like a rental portfolio and they sell them off. And I'm sitting there like, oh my Lord, what are you?
Yes.
But they just have no grid for how to do that. And they just are not entrepreneurially minded. And I mean, I don't know, we just talk about how, do you really want to work for the rest of your life, or would you rather, do what mommy and daddy do? And we just make that very normal in that conversation.
What has she said? I'm just curious.
She's like, I want to do real estate like you guys. And I'm like, you better, sister. You're the only one we got. So
We have
and,
one chance at this.
and then it's like, I'm praying for a spouse. I'm like, oh Lord, he's got to have a heart for giving, a heart for you, a heart for real estate, a heart for my kid, because, oh my gosh, I've seen some people get married recently. I've gone to some weddings and I'm like, I have got to pray for my kid's spouse even more,
Yes.
and because it's like, oh Lord, it's no joke. Like thinking about who Tegan will be and as she grows up and who she marries, like that is our responsibility to pray that in, I believe.
Oh, 100%. I agree with you. And who
Yeah.
you marry really, I mean, it's one of the biggest decisions of your life, really. So, you're bound, and and so we're going to be bound to someone we want to grow with.
Yeah.
But, um, so another thing I wanted to ask you about has to do with being a Christian.
Mhm.
Um, I would say your family is in ministry, even though maybe you would debate that with me, but I would say like, so how do you manage all these different things? Because a lot of times there are seasons of a lot of hard work
Mhm.
where maybe you cannot be as involved, right? And then there are other seasons where maybe you do have to be way more involved and, take some business things off your plate. So, how do you manage that along with your daughter?
Mhm.
Because I know as a mom, I'm sure you're like, I want to be an example to my daughter, and all these things. So, how do you deal with that with business and ministry and all these different nuances?
Yeah, that's a great question. You get really good at saying no. I mean, truly, that is the secret. Like, all of us only have 168 hours a week. That's it. Nobody has any more or any less. And you've got to decide what's important to you. And I mean, I'm really good at saying no to things. And if it's, I just recently joined a family group at our church of a small group of women, and was able to do that after I decided to, retire from the director of sales position. But up until that point, I knew I couldn't add that layer and that aspect to my life because then I'd literally never see my family. And
Right.
so I think they're just knowing there are seasons and you do not have to say yes to everything. And I now see a couple of I've gotten into a phase where I have friends that I don't like work with, which never really happened in my entire career. My only friends were people like I worked with you or I was related to you. I just had zero time for friends and because family is so incredibly important to me. And so, my in-laws, they pastor our church and there are always so many things going on. And Tim and I just we're okay with not being involved in every single thing going on because you can get so busy in your life and you miss life. Right. And so it's like when that space opened up, it's like, okay, I'm going to have some girlfriends now. That's awesome. But I'm still going to make sure I have family time. And now I've got time to work as well. And I'm really happy with that. But I love saying no to things because it's like, no, because I have been down that road when I'm in my early 20s. You say yes to everything. You're like, oh, yes, I can do this and do that. And you're just miserable, or I was.
Mm-hmm. So how did you notice the difference between saying yes to things? There are yes people where you trying to please other people, whoever it is. And it's very difficult for them to say no because they don't want to. I don't know what it is because I have no problem saying no either. But it is, I know it's difficult for a lot of people to say no. So what is your point of view? Is it like, I don't know if it's like, am I selfish that I'm like, I'm thinking like of my time, I can't just commit to everything, but what do you think about? Cause I'm like, am I just not as selfless as they are? Or was like, I just I don't want to be on everyone's calendar. I can't do that.
Absolutely.
What is it for you? Cause I'm just curious. I'm like, am I just weird or?
No, I think we're built exactly the same, Maritza, where it's easy for us to say no. It's easy for us to, our business coach, because I met him at, through the company I worked with, and he would come in and meet with all the different departments, and he's amazing. And so one time he was talking about conflict, and he said, conflict, you've got a group of people who are just terrified of conflict. And then you've got another group of people that are like, okay, I'm not staying here because this is terrible. So we're moving on. And we're not going to I think what I've had to realize is saying things without blowing up relationships like that. I err way over here. So I've had to okay, we don't have to say exactly what we're thinking,
Right.
And so I think it's just knowing that about yourself and then start, there are tons of books, there are tons of podcasts, there's tons of everything I think being self-aware of the things that I do not come naturally to me, and studying up on that stuff is going to get you over that hump of, hey, I do not have to be a people pleaser. I mean, there's so much material out there on how to overcome that challenge that it's like, don't stay stuck, figure out how to shift that and move on with your life.
Right. Like educate yourself on if there's an area of your life that you want to change, whether that's money or not being a people pleaser. Educate yourself. There's tons of resources to do that. There's a tons of free resources too. And educate and start working on it, right? Like start implementing what it says. But for people like you and me that we don't have a problem with confrontation and we don't have a problem with saying no, I think business also really brings that out of you. I don't know about you, but it's like, well, there's going to be tons of conflict in business. There's tons of problems. We get paid to solve problems. I mean, that's the whole point. But how have you controlled, because you were talking about, right? Like I will err on the side of let's not blow up and blow up their relationship because of the conflict. How have you learned to take it back, or what have you implemented to try to take that back? Because I think it has a lot to do with emotional control.
Yeah, that's such a good question, Maritza. You've asked really good questions. I think, when I worked at the real estate company, I was the director of sales, and then there was another guy, and he was the COO, and we both basically worked right under the owners of the company. And so he and I managed all the agents out in the field, and then he managed all the staff. And so whenever business wise, we would have to have tough conversations, things bring, people aren't doing their job, or, you've gone through these steps and now we're having to let you go. All of those hard conversations, we made sure to have them together. Like, you have two people in the room. And then also personality wise, like, he was much probably calmer would be the right word, and able to like temper things, and also being cognizant and aware of your shortcomings, so that you become very aware of how you're speaking to people, and then doing it a couple of times incorrectly, and like immediately apologizing to people. Man, I have apologized to so many people, and and you just go in and you apologize, and you take ownership, extreme ownership. That's an awesome book. Oh gosh, what is his name? Jocko Willink or something, but Extreme Ownership. That is an amazing book to read. And then my husband is very much like, he's that calming force. So if we're having to have difficult conversations, always having him present. And I messed up probably about a month ago, had to have a really hard conversation with somebody. And, because I was basically their direct supervisor, and I knew I should have waited until Tim was able to be on that call. But I thought, I can handle this. And, from having years and years of difficult conversations, I know that I handled it the way it needed to have been handled. But it tore her apart. And it's like, it would have been way better to have that information come from Tim. He could have said the same exact thing, and it wouldn't have completely leveled her. And so I think knowing your own weaknesses is absolute key, and having people help you and not a lone ranger.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, you guys have one of the things you do is a property management company, managing like short-term rentals. So how do you deal with leadership, like being one of the one of the main leaders of the team, right? It's you and Tim. I'm sure there's others, but you guys are the two heads essentially, right? There's one head, but you guys are the leaders there. So how do you deal with leadership and cultivating a company culture where you can be transparent and there's honesty, because there needs to be feedback so that people improve, or they know when they're doing something right or wrong, etc. But also compassion, so that you don't hurt people's feelings, and people aren't, they don't hate going to work, and they're not intimidated by you, essentially.
Yeah, that's a really good question too. So I think it's just setting it up from the very beginning. Like when we hire people, I set very clear expectations, and I literally tell them, I'm like, I'm going to tell you this. I am really good at awesome, easy conversations. Like, you are killing it. You are doing an awesome job. And I am really good at awkward and hard conversations. And so if there is an issue, like, we are going to talk about it, because I am not a sweep it under the rug kind of gal. And you've just got to know that. And like, we just hired one of my friends to help in the short-term rental company, and coordinating things and everything. And so one of my other friends, before we had even hired her, she had asked, she's like, so when you hire friends, like, how is that, because it can get awkward. And I said, oh yeah, you got to be upfront, like, especially with hiring a friend, and even somebody I didn't know. I always tell them, we're taking the first 2 to 4 weeks as hey, we're still in the interview process. And if you get into it and you realize, ugh, I hate this, this is not for me. And we realize as a company, hey, this isn't the right fit. We're going to have a conversation about it because we're not going to stay miserable. I mean,
Hmm.
small companies cannot afford to have people in the wrong seat. We just can't, you
Right.
know. You'll hemorrhage money. So I think setting the standard and your culture of this is who we are and this is how we operate, and we operate very clearly with clear communication, it just sets a massive tone. And so, like, practically speaking, if you didn't start that way, you just go back in and you do it now with all of your people. So another company that Tim and I just bought into, um, we bought a position of a partner out, and they hired a bunch of people they shouldn't have hired. So as soon as we come in, we had to let two people go, and all the rest of the staff is wondering how things are, and so we had to have that candid conversation with everybody. And after we did that, it was actually earlier this week on Tuesday. And literally everybody was like, thank you. Because we just said, what are your challenges? What's going wrong? Tell us so that we can work on fixing it. Because I am not a mind reader. So if you do not tell me,
Right.
I don't know. And
Right.
so I've always gotten really good feedback when I'm just super candid and vulnerable to other people, and let them know I don't have it all together and I'm going to make mistakes. And I expect you are as well. It's how can we move on and go through this together?
So how do you deal with the vulnerability? And because I mean, I see you as more of a really strong person where like you give off like, I'm a strong person, I can figure things out and etc. And typically when people are that way, it is hard for them to be vulnerable or to open up. Because I don't know why. I mean, but it's something I've noticed, like,
Mhm.
certain people are that way. And so how do you in am I wrong about that because you mentioned it, or it's like I need to be vulnerable with my team so they really know who I am?
Yeah, I am a vulnerable open book. Like Tim tells me, he's like, "Oh my gosh, I can read it all over your face exactly what you're thinking, and I can't hide it." And I've gotten a little bit maybe better, but yes, I am, I do have a strong personality, but in like coaching sessions or with my team, I'm one of the first people to start crying and bearing my soul. And that's just who I am. I don't know if that's part of that passionate, you're just passionate. And it's like, I feel like crying right now. So that's what I'm going to be doing, and I mean, I'm not like weeping on the floor, but I'm getting teary eyed, you know.
Right.
And so I just think that's okay because I think that makes us real to our team. This stoic, like, thing, your team is never going to come to you and tell you problems. And they're the first ones to know all of the garbage and the high school drama going on behind the scenes that was
Right.
happening at this company we just bought into. And I'm like, let me hear it all because this ain't Bayside High that we're running here. So get it on out and let's move on. And we've just established that it's like, now if there are any issues, call me and we're going to work it out, because nobody wants to work at a place that's miserable and everybody's like gossiping about each other.
Oh no. No, we've left high school and middle school. Like we are done with that. Like let's be adults, but yeah, it's hard. That's hard for some
Yes.
people. Who you were gonna say?
Well, and will people walk all over, yes, that will happen. But I would say 99% of the time, it is way better to be vulnerable than to try to be stoic. I mean, I can't even be stoic where you can't read it on my face. So I couldn't even try. But it, I am pro vulnerability.
Me too. I love being vulnerable because I think people get to know the real you if they're really paying attention.
Yes.
And this whole, it's like I would rather you just know who I am and I don't really think it's my personal opinion. I could be wrong, but I don't think people can use against me a story that I have introduced,
Yeah, absolutely.
because you're in control of that,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, you're telling other people that something I've openly said to
Mhm.
anyone.
Right.
So there is like, there's nothing hidden,
Mhm.
right? And I think that when we keep things in a dark room
Right.
and we don't ever bring them out, and we don't say, hey, I'm this amazing, all you do is talk about how amazing and great and strong and perfect you are,
Mhm.
when we all know we all have things about our character and our personality that are bad, that
Yeah.
are just, we all fail in one way or another.
Right.
So when we're open, I think about that, I think it just makes us relatable.
Yes, absolutely. I 1000% agree. Yes.
And so one of the other things I wanted to ask you had to do with being strong, and kind of one of the things that you guys have struggled with. I don't, whatever the struggle is,
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever felt like nothing is going right, in business, or, real estate, or ministry, or whatever.
Mhm.
Nothing's going right. Everything is really hard. What has pushed you to continue going,
Mhm.
when something like that has occurred?
Yeah. Gosh, that's really good. I think when when everything is going wrong, that's typically when I know I am completely out of step with the Lord. Like I have, you know, I am not making enough time for my relationship with the Lord to hear what he's having to say. And that's usually when that time happens. So it's just like, so we'll just refocus on, okay, Lord, help dig us out of this place and out of this hole. We did not ask you, and we went in guns ablazing and shouldn't have, or, and made this mistake. And we need your grace to get us out. And every single time he has gotten us out, and we've made some big mistakes along the way, you know? And so that's always been, it's when we've gone without really consulting the Lord.
And do you think that the Lord, I know he's opened doors and brought like new opportunities and people, to you, to, to help you in growing in business, but do you ever feel like your relationship with the Lord just, if there's any other, I know there are, but I don't know how to word it. It's like any other benefits, you know what I mean? Because sometimes for me, it's like I get a different perspective,
Mhm.
even just about the economy and like the real estate market, and like what I should do. And
Mhm.
I don't know if this is something that just happens to everybody, but I don't really hear people talking about that. And so
Yeah.
uh, my thing is like, what are ways that how your relationship with God has helped you in your business or in your real estate, other than bringing connections and people your way?
Yeah, gosh, that I love that, Maritza. And in this year since I stepped down from director of sales, I have definitely had more time with the Lord. And then it was at the beginning of this year, at the end of last year, I had a dry time, and it was just dry spiritually. And I mean, the Lord actually used you and Daniel. You guys spoke an like on point word into our lives. It was basically like, grow up, and you need to come up higher spiritually. And then he did that with Ryan Johnson at our church, our pastor, my mother, who's also my mother-in-law. Had prayed and spoken a word over me. And then she had called a fast. And so I had started fasting in January and just really got on, gosh, it was just like, just praying and just such a track with the Lord. And so, about a week before two business opportunities came up, because we knew going into this year, this was a massive planting year. Like, we have so much of our money tied up in a couple of different projects. We're in a really, really tight spot. And we knew it was a planting year. And I had been like praying, and it was like I knew something was going to open up, like a massive opportunity was going to open up. And I'm like, wow, that's really cool, because I have no idea what it is. And within a week, Tim had been called by two different people offering business opportunities that we had no idea. Like we don't know that those industries and that sort of thing. So one we passed on, we did the due diligence on it. It wasn't a good fit. The other one we did buy into, and it's like something we would have never ever done. And it was one of the first times where it wasn't the opportunity came and then we prayed about it. It was like I already knew it was coming and we needed to move forward with it. And so it was just, I don't know, being transitioned out of working for somebody else and then having now more time with the Lord has been incredibly beneficial. In just already knowing things are coming along and already having like a green light or a peace in your spirit about moving forward with something.
I think it's like just a knowing. It's like
Is.
you know something in your spirit before
Yes.
it even happens.
Yes.
And thankfully for you, it happens pretty quickly from
Yeah.
what you've been telling me.
Yeah.
Not me, honey. I wish it was just like that. I really wish that I would just have this knowing in my spirit and a week later it would happen. Doesn't happen like that with me. I mean, not really. There's certain things like I'll know something about another person's life or things like that. But for my life, it's like, you got to keep working, honey.
and, and
And that's funny
I,
to me, but I
yeah.
wish it was like you.
Oh gosh, I know it does. There are things that seem to go really fast. And then, like this one huge project that Tim has been working on, this development. I mean, he got massive breakthrough on it this past week. Well, he has been working his guts out on it for like 6 months. And to the point where I was like, honey, I think it's time to utilize plan B. And he just was like, not having it. He's like, and thankfully, he didn't listen to me. Let's just put it that way. Okay. So that man has a tenacity level like I have never seen before. And you need that in a team, in a partnership of just the different benefits that we bring to each other, the different strengths. But I mean, Maritza, it's just like you just keep going and you and Daniel have such incredible things that you've accomplished and will accomplish, and those big things they're just breaking loose, so you just keep going. And I know you all have an incredible tenacity level and high risk tolerance level, and that just
Huge. Yeah.
you just keep on going. I mean, those are two of the main ingredients you need, and the Lord, the third
Right.
one.
I tell Daniel this all the time. I'm like, that when I get something in my head, or I think he even said this in our vows. He was like, because it's one thing for people that are strangers or friends or whatever to say things about you, but
Yeah.
it's another thing when your spouse says something about you because they really know like all the good and all the bad. And he said, like, Maritza gets something in her head and it's like she just has to do it. And it's like my spiritual father always say it's like you put like a ball in a pit bull, right? Like they don't let it go.
Yes.
They don't let it go. And I was like, I tell him, I'm like, I feel like a lumberjack or lumberjill, whatever the name is. And it's like you have the saw or whatever it is, and you just keep hitting that thing with the axe. You
Yeah.
keep hitting the tree with the axe. And I was like, I have to see the tree fall.
Mm.
Eventually I was like, you don't think, okay, the tree's not going to fall. You start thinking, okay, I need to hit it on the other side. I got
Mhm.
to move it a little bit. I got to
Yes.
sharpen the axe, and then one day it finally happens.
Yes.
And by the time that happens, you're thinking about something else.
Yes. Yeah. You and Tim would be cut from the same cloth because I have said so many times over the years, I'm like, babe, you are like a dog with a bone and like that constant drip of water that does not stop and it just wears it away. Eventually it will break through. And I mean, it's happened every single time.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I think that perseverance gets you where talent sometimes just doesn't.
Oh, 1,000%, 1,000%. Yes.
Well, anyways, last words. I think
Yeah.
this was a really good session. We talked about so many things and um, was really insightful for me as well. So thank you for coming on.
Um,
Um, I wanted to just ask you, have any other bit of wisdom or advice for maybe someone that is a mother, is a wife, is in business, and maybe sometimes just feels like, is this all there is? I'm overwhelmed. It's what should I do? Am I doing the right thing? Like, just what advice would you give to someone like that?
yeah. I would say, and what Tim has had to say it to me so many times, he'll be like, Holly, enjoy the journey. Like, because we're going to get through this and then that part of our life is going to be over and we're going to be in the next phase and it's easier said than done. And if you're in a place of being like pulled in too many directions, I think you take an evaluation of your life and it's like, okay, what can I shove off my plate that doesn't need to be there so that I do not sacrifice my family on the altar of business, and I
Yeah.
don't sacrifice my relationship with the Lord on the altar of business. Like, figure out what is my why, and then make sure that that stays in front of you. Because, I mean, how many people have we seen that they work so hard and then they have no relationship with their children? I mean, it is heartbreaking. It's like their parents did all of this stuff and now their kids don't want anything to do with them. So that's a sobering thought, and a lot of the reason why I really had to take a step back, just because I want to make sure to have a good relationship with my family and with the Lord
Good.
above.
I love that. And I'm happy that you're doing that. I'm sure it's more fulfilling in a lot of ways. So happy for you. And if anybody wanted to connect with you or help, I don't know if you guys are like looking for, I don't even know, like people to send you deals in Tennessee or, business opportunities. Since now you're doing also that, what
Absolutely.
would be the best way for someone to get in touch with you if they
Yes,
wanted to do that?
that's a good question. Well, Maritza, as you know, I'm old and I'm so not all over social media like you young kids are.
You're
And
not old.
well, I don't like, ugh. Anyways, I would say probably sending stuff to my husband would be the best way, and by email because we're old.
Hmm.
So
Fine.
his email is TMP, which is trademark properties, TMP Knox, KNOX at gmail.com. And we are always, from the years and years of doing recruiting and hiring, I always say we are always recruiting. We may not be hiring, but if you're good people, I mean, as we're growing businesses, we're going to need more and more people, and we are always looking at deals and businesses to invest in.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Holly. This
You.
was great. I had a lot of fun doing this with you.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun too. I love you.
Love you too.